All right, welcome to video 17. We're going to talk about the cities themselves and some positives and negatives of city life. And so there are a couple different ways cities can be set up. I'm going to go through each of these with pictures. So the first one is the concentric circle model. And so we're kind of building around this central district here. An example of this is New York City. And so if you look at New York City on the map, the central district kind of happens right in the middle of the map. And then you get some other things out around them. The majority of the people live far away from the central business district and have to end up commuting in. And that's what we see in New York City. There's also kind of this in-between zone where it's not really a pretty place to be. And so the people that live out here have to commute their way in. And typically, you've got kind of a nicer region a little bit further away. And this is kind of a one way to draw a city, concentric circle. The next way is breaking it up into sectors. And so you've got our city core again, the high business area, and then everything is kind of spaced around it kind of evenly in these industrial or housing areas. And so we've got our industrial region over here. We try to keep that away from the residential people, which would be over here, right? 1 through 3 are the residential. You can see that the high residential, number 1, is the furthest away from the industrial. So where's kind of the bad smells and the pollution at? It's as far away from possible as these people. Those are the ones that have the money to afford to move further away. We've got the education and recreation center close to them as well. So you're kind of breaking it up into sectors and being effective that way in creating the city. A good example of a sector city is San Francisco to San Jose, California. Let me get our multiple nuclei city, Los Angeles. All right. So a multiple nuclei model is kind of similar to the sector, but we're not kind of circling the middle here. We've got a couple different important areas in it, and it's spread a little bit further apart. And it's kind of like Los Angeles. I think our multiple nuclei model would fit pretty well for Jacksonville if I had to pick one, somewhere between this and the sector model. The last part here are kind of these sprawled, endless urban areas. And so BOWASH stands for Boston to Washington. And so if you're in Boston heading down the coast southward, you're pretty much running through urban areas the entire way to Washington, D.C. And so this is like one huge connected area, and people commute all along this. They've got the trains that run, the subways that run long distances here to get people from one point A to point B. So some major problems, especially in the United States. There is kind of a lot that needs done to modernize the urban areas in the United States. Things like poor road conditions or bridges that are beyond or needing repair are really high dollar things that we've been putting off since the 1950s in some cases. And so we've got this aging infrastructure problem. Some estimates on the cost to upgrade the infrastructure and get it into where it should be, the modern kind of safe estimates here, are as high as $1 trillion, definitely well over $1 billion. And so this aging infrastructure is kind of this big looming cost that we keep putting off further and further and further. Other problems affecting our urban areas, budget crunches can happen. So part of this is due to companies moving their workers overseas, like building the factories in China or Mexico, wherever your clothing has been made at. That puts a crunch on the business, and it's a lot of the money that's not going into that city. And so there isn't the money left to fix the aging infrastructures or the deteriorating services. This could be things like bus systems, train systems moving around, public transportation would be part of it, police departments that don't have pension systems or have to do layoffs would be part of a deteriorating service. So there's a lot that could fit under that. We also have some poverty with violence, drugs, and just kind of general decay. If you think of Jacksonville, there are areas in Jacksonville that you would not want to be in at night, and a lot of that is due to this problem right here. Some advantages. All right, so recycling is very easy. Everybody lives in the same area. We can collect recycling very easily. It's kind of already collected for us. You just have to go around to each individual house. So it makes it very simple in an urban area to collect recycling. You're not spending a lot of money on gas running the trucks all over the place. We also have decreased birth rate. There's less space, and so if you have a large family and you want to have a large area to raise that family in, it's not available in the city, or it costs a lot of money, and so it kind of naturally forces less children in. All right, so the money we pay per person for environmental protection is pretty high in the urban areas. This would include things like sewage treatment or air pollution controls. There's not going to be mining in a city, so there's more money spent to protect the environment in the city. And then by concentrating the people, we're impacting the biodiversity less, right? If all your people live in the red dot, you've got all this area outside the city, right, that would have been farms previously or people sparsely living throughout that have all moved into it. That area is kind of available for biodiversity because we've got a high density of people in the center here. Some disadvantages. We've got no plant life here, and so that leads to the heat island effect, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Another problem is the lack of food. So we have to spend a lot of money and burn a lot of fossil fuels to get food into cities to feed everybody. The footprint, because of that, is really large, right? Instead of walking down the street to pick your apples from your orchard, you have to get them shipped in from like Costa Rica or something like that. So that footprint really grows in the city. You get a huge footprint. Same thing with water and wastewater, all this kind of stuff. The flooding problems are there because we are turning wetlands into pavement, right? Parking lots, we're putting concrete over top of wetlands, which would naturally collect that water. We're also channelizing the rivers and straightening them up, deepening them in some cases, which speeds them up and makes them more susceptible to floods. We get a lot of pollution, just kind of physical air pollution or garbage on the streets is produced in larger numbers. Part of this is because there are more cars around. Part of it is because the power plants that produce the energy are going to be located nearby because it's cheaper to build them near the city and move the electricity or the energy a short distance versus way outside the city and moving it a long distance. Noise pollution. Cities are also very noisy, right? Car alarms, car sounds, airplane noises, construction noises, all these contribute to noise pollution. This is the heat island effect. So in the heat island effect, by laying a lot of pavement, right, black pavement, that absorbs heat, and so it gets hotter than the surrounding area, which creates warm air which rises up. When that warm air rises up, it of course has to be replaced by cooler air from the side. That air that is down here then needs replaced, and so that warm air will cool and fall, and you get this endless cycle here. If you are producing air pollution, right, here's my spoke for the air pollution, let's say that's a car running there, in the center of the city, that air pollution follows this cycle and it doesn't actually end up leaving the city. And so every single day that you drive your single car to work, your air pollution is kind of additive over time. And if you put in all the people living in the city driving at the same time, plus the power plants and the construction equipment and all the other things going on in this city, all of that pollution in the air is kind of staying in the area. And so this is one of the reasons why some cities like Mexico City, Beijing have huge smog problems. Another problem associated with living in cities is noise exposure or noise pollution. These are some of the potential side effects of noise pollution. You can see down here some different noise levels. I just realized I can move my face a little bit here. But as you go up, you end up having more and more noise damage. The decibel scale is logarithmic. So each increase here is times 10 greater. And so permanent damage starts to begin after 8 hours of 85 decibel exposure, which is just above the average factory. You can picture in a city, especially if you're around construction zones like chainsaws, or if you're around these really loud vehicles, airplanes that should be up in this area somewhere. I think they're just over 100 decibels. So a lot of things here. That prolonged exposure is where you start causing damage and producing some of these results. Another big problem of living in cities is kind of the inputs and outputs. So all of this stuff over here needs to be put into your average 1 million person city. So Jacksonville is pretty close to 1 million people. Let's take a look at what it requires to run Jacksonville for a day. These are daily inputs. This is a lot of water. 600,000 tons of water must be moved in. For Jacksonville, a lot of this comes out of the aquifer. But in some cases, like Los Angeles, which is much more than 1 million people, that water is pumped in from the Colorado River. So you got to bring the water in. If the water comes in, you also have to get the sewage out. And so it's about equal. A little bit less sewage comes out. Some of this water will re-enter the storm drains and be runoff. But here in Jacksonville, that sewage water either goes into a septic tank or it goes to wastewater treatment and goes right back into the river. So those are kind of the two options for the sewage in Jacksonville. Fuel. Big portion of the fuel is coal, right? That's what our power plant uses to burn to make electricity. And then you've got gas and oil for the cars. And so roughly 9,000 tons of fuel every single day. I would guess for Jacksonville, this number is probably a little bit higher with how heavily we rely on coal. And then food, 2,000 tons of food come into it every day. We don't produce that in the city of Jacksonville, nowhere near that amount per day. So that's grown elsewhere, shipped here via trucks, comes in on trains, planes, boats, all that kind of stuff is going to bring that food in. It all has to go out. All of this over here, this refuse, these are going to go to the dump. There are several city dumps around town. The dump's essentially a tomb that's sealed with all this junk in it forever, and it doesn't ever leave. So the dump is kind of a permanent feature. Usually that dump's not going to be within city limits, but right outside the city. And then the air pollution naturally disperses unless you're going through the heat island effect. Luckily here in Jacksonville, we're close to the ocean. We're also very flat, flat land around us, so we get this ocean breeze that'll kind of push that water either inland or push that air inland or out to sea. And that's where we're going to stop here. Thanks for watching this kind of bonus video 17. I hope it was helpful. Please come with some notes and some topics of discussion.